Hey everyone, I'm Ryan Schwartz, Senior Manager of Product Marketing here at Abnormal AI. Thank you for joining us for this panel discussion at Innovate 2026. Look, everyone out there is well aware that businesses are moving faster. Attackers, because of that, are also getting more sophisticated and moving just as quickly. And traditional tools and strategies are struggling to keep up. I'm joined today by Daniel Peterpohl, the VP of Information Security at Sunrun, and Sherry Leach, Deputy CISO. I figure we'll start with some brief introductions before we dive into the questions. So I'll turn to you, Sherry, first, if you want to do a quick intro to yourself.
Sure. So I've been in the manufacturing organization for the last 8 years, since 2017. And then it kind of gets interesting. You go back a little bit. And so before that, 18 years I spent in the intelligence community, actually studying and doing cyber investigations for advanced persistent threat. And then also started my time in this career field back when it was information operations, information security, as an Army intel officer. So my background is very threat focused. I focus a lot on the TTPs that the threat actors are doing, and then translating that into our enterprise and making sure that it reflects in our cybersecurity program and posture.
Appreciate that background.
Yep.
Really impressive. Very cool. Looking forward
Thanks.
to the conversation today. And then Daniel, over to you if you want to intro yourself as well, because you'll have the first question too. So
Sure, yeah. I've been at Sunrun for about a year. I lead our security program here. Prior to this, I worked at Amazon. I led the identity and access management program for the stores business. And then prior to that, I held a bunch of different engineering roles. I consider myself kind of a hands-on practitioner, servant leader. I've been a developer, a service desk support agent, a sysadmin, and then a whole bunch of blue team functions. But really excited to participate in the conversation today.
yeah, really excited to have you here as well. So let's dive in. Daniel, first question's for you. What would you say, and I know it's hard to boil it down to just one, but what is the single, if you had to pick, emerging threat or emerging threat trend that you're seeing internally today? And how are you preparing your program to address that?
In the past few years, we've seen more threat actors shift to blending into the normal behavior of the business, commonly referred to as living off the land. It's not so much classic malware as it is just legitimate access and legitimate workflows being abused in ways that are hard to detect. I think it is increasingly important that humans leverage automation tools, namely, these days AI, to stay ahead of that threat vector. I think we can automate ourselves into a position where we have all of the signals that help us identify more quickly potentially bad behavior or anomalies outside of what would be typical. And then, again, like leveraging AI, try to triage in a way where we're only servicing things that actually need to be worked on. It's easy to get overwhelmed with all of the information that security teams ingest these days. So really leaning into automation and the capabilities of generative AI to summarize and enrich our workflows, I think is paramount to modern security program success. And it's more about fast, confident determination of misuse than it is about preventative controls. I'm a blue team like through and through my entire career, but every layered defense will eventually fall victim to some threat actor, some emerging technique, and staying ahead of that really comes down to how fast you can move and contain those actions.
No, I appreciate that answer because I think it's interesting what you point out there, because it's not it challenges the traditional idea you're just looking for signatures too, right? Everything is just moving at the speed of the business. It looks like normal access. It looks like normal behavior. How do you determine when it truly isn't? And that becomes a challenge that reaches beyond what humans are ultimately capable of in a lot of cases. I don't know, Sherry, if you had, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in. I definitely think living off the land has been a challenge, right, for security operations teams. I guess I kind of looked at this question a little bit different. I kind of see the emerging threat that we're observing more within the industry that I'm in is the concept of AI-driven social engineering, right? So, the threat actors are using AI. They're creating hyper-personalized phishing, really, really authentic and sophisticated deepfakes, both audio and video, and sometimes even like synthetic identities, right? And these tactics are bypassing our traditional security controls because they actually exploit the human factor and our trust rather than kind of technical vulnerabilities. And I mean, it just, there's different ways to deal with that. There's the human-centric defense, ensuring, we're running like advanced simulations of AI-enabled attacks, reinforcing our security culture, where we really encourage the kind of see something, say something for employees, report suspicious interactions without fear of repercussion. And that's kind of what we're seeing. The reality is really that the threat landscape is evolving, I feel like, faster than some of our traditional security tools. Daniel mentioned that. So it's really combining a strategy that looks at adaptive technology, AI, agentic AI into our security tools, and then that coupled with strong human awareness and governance, I feel like is really, the focus that I see for preparing for that.
I think that segues really well into the next question, which is actually for you as well, Sherry. But I will also say the synthetic identities in particular are so interesting because it's becoming really pernicious in recruiting in particular, I've noticed. But continuing on your response there, how do you, and you kind of touched on it, but how do you account for, or how do you maintain the visibility you need to maintain? How do you understand what people are actually doing? How do you discover some of these hidden threats and attackers?
Right. So really it's kind of building a unified view of everything that happens. So identifying and correlating signals across all the different domains. So behavioral, data, telemetry, across endpoints and things like that. It's really building what I call an identity telemetry fabric across all of our visibility points. So we're not just mapping, where and what people are doing, but it's also looking and seeing how data flows. So unify those signals across your identity provider, EDR, TASB, your SIM, data, and try to look at it from a common view and a common graph. And then there's this whole thought of, zero trust, right? In practice theory. But then how do you put that into production? Really, it's continuous validation, right? So every request gets looked at in real time, a context from a device posturing perspective, where they're coming from, looking at behavioral baselines, right? And then applying adaptive controls, right? So if there's risk signals, we step up MFA, we isolate sessions, we revoke tokens, we do just-in-time, access. And so it's more about looking at a composite view. And I think sometimes that's hard to actually get some sort of composite vulnerability or visibility, and looking at it from not just an attack surface, right, but then behavioral as well, and overlaying that into kind of real-time movement as well, and looking at those risk signals, right? Visibility is key. If you can't see it, you can't identify it, you can't detect it, you can't respond to it.
No, I appreciate that perspective. And I'll also call out that I love that you mentioned zero trust, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of value in that strategy before, I guess, people like me in marketing kind of ruin the
Right.
term forever.
Yeah.
Sherry, turning back to you for the next question. And again, I
Sure.
feel like we've touched on quite a bit of this already, but one of the hardest things is appropriate measurement, right? And finding the right metrics to use to really quantify risk. So what's the metric that actually matters to you for real risk reduction, and why can it be so hard to get aligned on what the right metric is oftentimes?
Yeah, there's really there's two key ones, but they're very interrelated, right? So the first one is mean time to contain, right? And really that's the average time it takes from the moment an incident's detected until the threat is actually contained, right? What does that mean? The attacker's ability to move laterally or cause further damage is stopped, right? We're limiting the blast radius and preventing any additional escalation. The other one that's super important as well is mean time to recover. So that's the time from acknowledgement of incident. It has containment in there, and then full restoration of normal operations, including remediation, cleanup, patching, service recovery. It's really focusing on returning business critical systems to a secure operational state. And the way that we help make that translate into business, and Daniel talked about it earlier, was making sure that we translate that into a business language and how it's important to them, right? So MTTC to them is we frame it in a way that says, what is the time taken to prevent further damage and protect our critical assets after detection, right? MTTR, we talk about business framing it for time taken to resume business critical service and then minimize our downtime costs. So for manufacturing, downtime means no production, means we're losing revenue. So making those two metrics translate into their work, linking it to financial impact, and also expressing it in terms of risk reduction, right?
Yeah, it's a matter of moving it from the esoteric to the relatable, right?
Yes.
I guess, to boil that down.
Absolutely.
Daniel, any additional comments you wanted to add there?
Sherry covered it really well. I think the other angle I would try to highlight for a security program: how are you saving the business time and cost? There are few times in security where we can actually accelerate business process. Oftentimes it's layering on additional processes or inspection. A couple that come to mind: passwordless, right? Can you quantify the time it takes to log in across all of your users? And then as you're improving that through potentially faster and more secure mechanisms like biometrics, like PINs that are device bound, you quantify and then explain, hey, we're saving developers 100 person hours, 100 person years, over some period of time. I think it also translates to how are you layering automation into your workflows. A vulnerability might pop up, and this is going to happen across every business, frequently. It might pop up on 100 assets on, a day one. You need to go and mitigate that very quickly. How are you automating the steps required such that it could take 8 hours, but we've done some work to make it take 1 hour, and then explain to the business, this saved you, in aggregate X amount of hours. I think these are incredibly important when you're talking to senior leaders to get their buy-in, but just want to double down on what Sherry started with. Security programs are there to understand and manage security risk, and the best way to do that is to control time to triage, investigate, and contain, right? It's also important that you translate other work, program work, into things that the business would care about.
No, such great points from both of you too. Because I mean, in the decade that I've been in the industry, it feels like security used to just be, or the biggest challenge was how do we make it not seem like a cost center? And there really does seem to be that shift towards, well, it's part of the business, and here's how it really fits into the business. So it makes a ton of sense. Daniel, going to you for the next question. We'll shift to automation and AI a bit here. So, and you touched on AI quite a bit already. So as you've layered in some of the more advanced tools and automation that you have in your security stack, what's the biggest unintended friction you've created, and how are you working it out before it becomes a larger usability problem?
There are a couple of angles for this question, my view. One is, these typicically aren't technical challenges. Yes, there is new attack surface, there are new techniques to understand, there are new skills to develop to go mitigate some of the TTPs that we're seeing. But it's mostly just a people and cognitive challenge. How do you best understand how the business wants to implement AI, and then try to layer your program into it such that you're not impeding their adoption and the revenue generation? There are two examples that I'll highlight that are really close to home for me this year, and I think for a lot of businesses. One is the use of retail AI, right? It has just exploded across the industry. Everybody's got a subscription to ChatGPT if you're a technologist. You might be using other third-party tools, Cursor, potentially. If it's not provided to the developers, they're going to go figure out how to generate code faster and easier for themselves. So getting a handle on the shadow IT usage of that, and then trying to layer in guardrails, encouragements. Hey, this isn't safe for this reason. Please go use this other thing that's company approved and covered by our enterprise controls and agreements and whatnot. I think has been a challenge, and getting in front of that requires a lot of touch points at the network layer, the client layer for devices owned by the company or personal, and that's a very slow transition, but one that teams should be focused on. The other angle I'll talk about is the actual implementation of these technologies and how we automate leveraging AI. My team has gone all in on trying to automate ourselves into a much better position. We're a pretty lean group for a company of about 15,000 people, plus partners for B2B and whatnot. The only way we can scale to that size has been to introduce tooling into our triaging of alerts, into our enrichment of our alerts, such that we can do a lot more as a single person. Scale ourselves up to 10, 20, 30 person capacity. Great success on the detection side. On the prevention side, we've more looked at how do we classify systems and enrich our classifications, and then automate the threat modeling component. And I think that has been tremendously valuable. And then I really didn't get to touch on the business usage, but there's a whole section around that too. How do you actually work with teams to give them the guardrails and help that they need to do this safely and securely? But it is moving at breakneck pace. Teams should be laser focused on how they make themselves faster and better with AI, but also how they kind of partner with the business to understand and protect their usage of AI.
Right, because even with the benefits outweighing the risk, you still need to be cognizant of those risks, right? Turning towards external risks again, when we think about things like supply chain risk, third parties, gaining access to internal tools, the acceleration of cloud app sprawl, what external risk factors concern you most right now? And similarly, what trade-offs are you willing to make to manage it?
Yeah, listen, one that I'm seeing right now kind of that has, come to light a couple times. I have one great example, sales loft drift is really the SaaS to SaaS supply chain, right? So everybody wants to interconnect with our IDP, single sign-on, all bringing it all together. And so one of the concerns that I have is really just that malicious or overprivileged OAuth integrations that really can turn one vendor's compromise into hundreds of downstream breaches. We've seen attackers steal tokens, abuse app consents to bypass MFA, to move across Salesforce, Microsoft 365, and other critical SaaS applications, really without our knowledge, right? Because it looks like, once again, getting back to what Daniel brought up in the beginning, it looks like authorized activity. The sales lift drift one, that's a big one. That supply chain attack that was earlier this year, really where attackers compromised an OAuth token from SalesLoft, and then their chatbot from Drift. And then 700 organizations were impacted where they exfilled credentials from AWS, Snowflake, Google, you name it. So really the downstream breach effect it becomes magnifying the blast radius. So to address it, I think what we're focusing on is we're actually sacrificing speed for assurance. And what I mean by that is stricter consent governance. So we have processes to verify publishers. We've done things like shorten token lifetimes, make sure logging is appropriate and security relevant events are being kept. And then just kind of, making sure that our vendor onboarding really aligns with cyber frameworks out there like NIST and things like that. That's the friction that we're willing to accept to ensure we keep our data safe in an ecosystem that's accelerating at machine speed. We used to say identities the new perimeter. I think coming up, OAuth tokens and app consents are going to be kind of the new perimeter within the security realm.
That's really interesting. And then on vendors, third-party vendors in particular, yeah, you have to have some friction there, right? Because you never know what their security practices are as stringent as yours are. So making sure they
Exactly.
align to it. Yep. This has been such a fascinating conversation so far, but let's go to the final one. If you had to rebuild your security program from zero, blow it all up, start over around one thing that concerns you most, actually keeps you up at night, what would you build first and what would you leave out?
I'm going to bias towards my experience here and say that identity is the place that I would focus first. I think of identity as a single point of influence that touches pretty much all technologies. If you can get a good foundation around identity, you can do a lot with it, right? You might not have the greatest network security. I think endpoint's incredibly important, but you might not have all of the capabilities that you would desire there. If you have a strong identity layer, the front door for all of your applications can be authenticated strongly, monitored for interactions and bad behavior, and ultimately give you kind of a point of influence, as I said, across everything. Observability is the second tier, and I think this is just as important. But being able to actually see what's happening in your systems, ingesting logs, taking off-the-shelf detection catalogs so you can quickly ramp up on MITRE framework or other TTPs that might be specific to your industry. I also am not a huge fan of checkbox type detection catalogs. I think you need to best understand what type of attacks you're seeing in your business and then cater to those first through feedback loops with key people within the business who are either being targeted or within your threat intelligence or security operations team who might be more knowledgeable on the institution. And then the last component I would focus on, starting from zero, what is your regulatory and compliance obligations for your specific industry? Deeply understand that, make sure you're compliant, make sure you're not creating a material risk, especially if you're a publicly traded company. And then what would I leave out? I would leave out security theater. As I said, I'm not a huge fan of checklists and just kind of by the numbers security. I'm a big proponent of Center for Internet Security and other professional groups that put out fantastic guidance on how to have a robust and comprehensive program. But I'm not somebody who prescribes to the idea that you can just kind of walk through that step by step and hit the highest value, highest impact things first. So I think take those off the shelf lists, then prioritize them based on what you're seeing and how you can do the most good. And that really starts with understanding your business, their priorities, and what is critical to those priorities, right? From a technology, process, people perspective. Bottom line, we need to match real business behavior and help the company move quickly and be just as fast and an accelerator.
No, it makes sense. And obviously we have a lot of respect for CIS here as well, but even then those frameworks don't, and the checklists don't account for the nuance of each organization, right? Sunrun isn't going to be a one size fits all kind of organization, just like any business won't. So it makes sense. Sherry, over to you for your thoughts.
Very similar to Daniel. So identity, definitely number one. Observability. The other one that I would have focused on more, if I could take it back to zero, is asset inventory, right? So both internal and external. I kind of love doctrine, right? So art of war, Sun Tzu principle is something that I learned when I was in the military and throughout my intel community time. So know thyself, know thy enemy, right? So we can't protect what we don't know. And so really focusing on that is really important because we need to be able to know what we have out there, what type of services are being externally faced, and then also what do you have internally as well. I guess the other thing is when I look at my entire security ecosystem, I would really want to, once again, lean in on agentic AI, hyper automation. We have a very lean team. Once again, I really want my team focusing on high value, low volume events, and I want to automate high volume, low value events so that they can be focusing on things that are important. When I think about the cyber battlefield, I want to have the same arsenal that my adversary has, right? And so the threat actors are using AI every day, and I want to make sure that my team has all of the capabilities as well to go up against those on a daily basis. As far as what I would leave out, gosh, some of the technologies that I feel like aren't keeping up with those type of things. There's this whole conversation going on right now with myself and my team about the value of SIM. And so, I would really want to take a look at our entire ecosystem once again, make sure the interoperability is good, make sure the signals can cross across all of them, and that we can get kind of that unified fabric that I was talking about in the beginning to really see what our threat landscape looks like, and also be able to detect and respond quickly. We all know that nothing's 100%. Identify and protect is super important. But for me, where I put my money on is the detect and respond side of the house. How quickly can I contain, and how quickly can I stop the threat actor from moving laterally within my organization?
Great perspective. And if we had more time, I'd love to dig into that value of SIM conversation too. That sounds pretty interesting. But I appreciate the both of you. I think the through line through all of this really was accounting for the human and behavioral layer, right? Kind of finding those unknowns the unknown unknowns in a lot of ways, and, moving quickly but thoughtfully. I appreciate both of your perspectives so much. And of course, thank you both for being customers of Abnormal as well. So with that, I appreciate everyone in the audience as well for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of Innovate.